In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, may the peace and blessings of God be upon his prophet and his companions. At the outset, I would like to thank our colleagues from the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and I would like to thank Dr. Omar Ashur, who was keen to for us to be part of this conference. And before we start, I would like to congratulate you for the blessed month of Ramadan, and may Allah Almighty make it a healthy month for us and make us be healthy while approaching to this very important month. And now this is going to be defense strategies of small states and smaller forces, and the session is small defense, Qatar's approach to security, due to the fact that the region is considered stable and it is a center for finance and transportation, but it remains close to points of tension and also political upheavals and crises in the region. So there are many regions in the Middle East that subdue such kind of issues. So we have pivotal changes and transformations in terms of defense and security as a result of technological developments that had led to the 5G kind of wars that had impacted the security and the military apparatuses, defense and security. We're going to discuss three most important themes. The first theme, which is smart power of small states, Qatar alliance building and deterrence strategies. And this is from the perspective of the speaker by Dr. Khalid Al-Khulaifi, who is a diplomat and an academic who is specialized in international relations. He has got a PhD in international relations from the Australian National University. He held a position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he is an expert in CPI PR, and also he is a lecturer in security and international law at Qatar University. And here lies the importance of smart tools and power, which has become part and parcel of the strategies of the state in order to support its defense strategies, security strategies, and deterrence strategies. And as a result of that, we were able to build a number of strategies with a number of active members in order to limit the impact of any risks. After that, we're going to take questions at the end of this session. You have 15 minutes. Microphone, please. I'm going to speak in English, not because I am unable to speak in Arabic, due to the terminology perhaps that forces me to speak in English. البحث الذي تم القيام به هو يتعلق بالقوى
title. I'm sure that a lot of you will attempt to question the philosophy behind it, and let's go on that journey together. So the topic of the title is the smart power of small states, and I'm sure that some of the researchers have attempted to cover some sort of definition of what a small state is and the conduction of what a small state assumably defined in the existing literatures. My only addition to small state definition is that there is a self-affirmation of what a small state is. So if we go back to the state of Qatar and, for example, the Emir's speech in 2022 in Davos, he stated as a small state in his speech. This is a self-affirmation by the state of what a small state is. You can define it by the Small State Forum, which conducts more than 80 or 90 states. You could define it by population. You could define it by geography. You could divide it by power, just as Rothstein in 1963 did. There are many definitions of what a small state is, but my advice when I'm conducting research on small states is that you tend to have the definitions of which the scope of the research is entitled to. And hence why I try to add this self-affirmation to the definition of what a small state is. I believe that there are three research gaps that I try to cover when we're talking about the smart power of small states. First is that there is a conceptual and theoretical gap. IR theories, especially neorealism, is a dominant theory of international relations discipline, tend to overfail to encompass the small state definition in the international system. And it tends to claim that small states are weak and vulnerable entities. We get that. Move on. What's happening in the world? What changed? What requires us as scholars to understand the changes of the international system in order for us to have this empirical understanding of what a small state is and what are the power dynamics of a small state. Second is the methodological. I try to apply critical discourse analysis. I'm not going to go deep into the methodological to bore you with, but critical discourse analysis is a methodology of where I try to adapt Fairclaw's model, which is this three stages, the description, interpretation, and explanation, and moving towards understanding the text, encrypted text, the interviews conducted, and then the explanation from the researcher perspective in terms of how do we understand smart power. And thirdly, smart power on Qatar is under research. We don't see many research that kind of explains the smart power dynamics. We've seen research such as, I don't want to name anyone in particular, although scholars tend to do so, not to point any fingers, but we've seen such new titles of what power is: subtle power, rented power, and other dynamics of power. In my belief, you don't need to go that far. Sometimes you could stick to Nai's perspective of soft, hard, and smart power. And smart power by itself came as a result of an advice to the Obama administration, by the way. It came due to the course of what Bush doctrine occurred of the applicability of hard power in its foreign policy, and then shifted to Obama advising him that smart power could be the path forward. The research question that I'm trying to tackle here is to what extent that Qatar strategically utilize power alliances building and deterrence to navigate regional and global challenges. We can go a bit on the research hypothesis. First is the evolution of foreign policy of the state of Qatar, smart power impact on small states in general, the effectiveness of smart power in alliances building and deterrence, and lastly, the comprehensive insights into Qatar policy making process. As I was describing on the methodology, quick description to it is that critical discourse analysis, we try to take the text analysis, the formal analysis, and the contextual analysis. And to reach the contextual analysis, what I did is that I tend to believe the critical discourse analysis tend to focus more on the social perspectives. As an IR scholar, I felt that I'm quite obligated to take a bit of the methodology and try to shift that to apply it more towards the scope of my IR focused research. And what I did is that I modified the Fairclaw model to apply to the context of this research. My modification to Fairclaw's model is basically the interpretation part, is where I said we need the policymakers' understanding of the text in order for us to reach the critical discourse analysis of which the power dynamics, which is soft power, hard power, smart power, whatever you want to call it. And as a scholar, you tend to try to see where is it applied. Because if you go to a policymaker and you tell him, how do you identify smart power in example X? He'll tell you, oh, hold on, what are you talking about? Similarly, what we're trying to apply in critical discourse analysis is that the third stage is the researcher's obligation to try to attempt to explain the power dynamics within the scope context. Moving to the theoretical framework, again, I'm modifying a lot here. The theoretical framework, as I was saying previously, is that if we look into the international system, let's agree with the neo-realist approach and say, okay, we understand that the international system is a system of anarchy. We all agree, right? Chaos is happening everywhere, especially with new leaderships coming into play. Today is a war, tomorrow could be a war. God knows what's going to happen after tomorrow. And this is the context of neo-realists trying to explain how the international system functions. We said, okay, but the issue that I believe within the neo-realists, as stated previously, is that they don't tackle small states within the scope of the theory. And I'm trying to branch out from neo-realism and saying, okay, let's branch out a little bit and try to explain from a neo-realist perspective that, yes, it is a system of anarchy. We see the power dynamics, but let's focus a little bit on small states' power dynamics. as stated previously, for example, Nai's approach to soft and hard and smart power. Let's go to the historical background of understanding Qatar's power shifts. I'm not going to go through the whole historical route of how foreign policy was established, just due to time concerns. In 1995, the father Amir, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, in research, you will see that he's the granted birthright of soft power creation to the state of Qatar. He created many dynamics that evolved into the creation of soft power. Most of the strategies were concentrated and centered towards soft power strategies. And therefore, since 1995 until 2011, we see that most of the strategies were concentrated and focused towards soft power implementation. My argument is that in 2011, due to the Arab Spring, chaos, anarchy, there were a lot of shifts happening in the region. Hence why we saw that that was the first moment of the smart power strategy being applied to the state of Qatar. We saw that in Libya, we saw that in Yemen, we saw that in other case scenarios of where smart power strategy was implemented. And hence why 2011 was the turning point of power shift dynamic, in my opinion, which resulted into the birth of smart power strategy in the state of Qatar. In 2013, we saw a total shift of strategy implementation that was smart power implemented. We'll talk about that even further on two examples that I'm bringing you today, which is alliances building and deterrence, and how can we scope that and see the implementations of alliances building and deterrence power to the state of Qatar. Firstly, let's go one by one. So alliances building. If we go into alliances building and we take the arguments of neorealism, if we take many writings on the reason why a small state would ally is because small states are weak and vulnerable entities. Okay, we get it. Move from that. What are the shared interest bases between a small state and a big state in order for a big state to ally with a small state? And I've seen that there is a lot of under-research on that shared interest basis of why I kind of claim that the basis strategy of an alliance is a smart power. Meaning that today, if we see that the strategic dialogues occurred between the state of Qatar, and I'll give two examples here, the United States of America and Turkey, as big allies of Qatar. If we see, for example, the United States, the basis relation of an alliance is not merely only a diplomatic or economic, but has this variety scopes of smart power dimensions. Basically, when we're trying to define smart power, just to kind of loop you in, smart power is a combination of hard and soft power. Soft power, I'm sure my colleague here, Dr. Danah, will go in deep into it, and the other types of what soft power is. Hard power is merely military resources or economic resources as defined by Naimi. Now, a combination of both is smart power. And this is what I was saying is when Naimi is trying to advise Obama administration that you need to apply more smart power, not just hard power, not just interventions, military power, economic resources. You need more of soft power in terms of foreign policy, cultural, etc., etc. And when we're trying to understand the alliances basis, we see within the strategic dialogues between both countries, for example, the US has Al-Udeid base. When you go to Al-Udeid base, a lot of controversy in terms of the idea of what Al-Udeid base is. A lot of people assume that Al-Udeid base is just military troops on Qatari soil. That's it. And that's not the even close to the idea of what Al-Udeid base is. For someone who's been to Al-Udeid base and talking to people within Al-Udeid base, I've seen that the Al-Udeid base does not only consist of military American troops. It consists of 21 nations within the base. And that by itself, an indication of that this is a form of alliance within an alliance. And the basis of the military alliance of Al-Udeid base goes beyond the normal narratives of what a military alliance is. So, for example, the C-130 that's used and I believe we're one of the few countries in the Middle East who actually have that kind of number of C-130. C-130 is the big military aircraft that you see a lot of the humanitarian aid that Qatar tends to send in Gaza, in Sudan, and other countries. So what I was doing as a researcher, I was saying the C-130 aircraft by itself is a smart power example. Why? Because it's a military aircraft and it carries a humanitarian aid. And that by itself is a smart power strategy. And we're doing that a lot. And I've seen that this is where I believe that this research is not being focused on, is because there is a lot hidden behind the hard power. Most of the research on hard power is military force, war, X, Y, Z. We reached a conclusion. They failed, we won, hooray, right? And that's normally what a hard power research would conduct towards. But this is what I'm saying, is that there is another idea that you could unreveal when it comes to the understanding of what hard power is. It could be hard power resources used for soft power mechanisms, hence what I'm saying is a smart power strategy. So the basis of the alliance that I've seen in terms of Turkey and USA as an example is conducted by military alliances, economic alliances, diplomatic alliances, cultural alliances. And all of these are components of a smart power strategy. And hence, I believe that these kind of alliances cannot be framed in the simple matrix of a bandwagoning situation. You cannot state the oblivion that small states are only an ally with X and Y and Z for survival reasons. It's a one-sided equation. And I believe that this equation requires you to look beyond the wall and see that there are other merits of interests that are unrevealed, of which hence I'm trying to unreveal by saying that it's a shared interest-based alliance. Equally, a big state could search for any other small state to ally with. Equally, a small state could search for other powers to ally with. When it comes to deterrence, and I'll try to do that really quickly, I know we're kind of past the idea of the Gulf crisis, but I have to go back to it because it's an example of a smart power deterrence. A lot of scope of the Gulf crisis, deterrent of it reaching the conclusion of, God forbid, a military interaction between the states, was claimed that it was only the mediation that resulted into it. What I've seen and witnessed is that there is a lot of smart power strategies conducted that resulted into deterring any external force that could threat the national security of the state of Qatar. We saw that in the military parade. We saw that by Barzan variety of investment. I mean, one general point that I probably could share is that, for example, the ammunition manufacturing actually happens here in Qatar from 0.2 or 0.4 caliber until 12.9 per Barzan. They might be right, they might be wrong. I think you could correct me later on that. Excellent. So this by itself is an evidence of Qatar building its hard power strategy in order for it to be as equal to its soft power ability, creating a smart power strategy, which kind of resulted into deterring any forces threatening the national security of the state of Qatar. And therefore, I saw that it was a deterring, smart power strategy implemented by the state of Qatar was by itself a deterring force for any escalation of military confrontation during the Gulf crisis. I will end on that note. There is a lot more to unpack, but just to give more space for my other colleagues. Thank you.
ننتقل الآن إلى المحور الثاني الذي تناقش فيه الدكتورة دانا علي العنزي موضوع استراتيجية القوة الناعمة للدول الصغيرة، دراسة مقارنة بين دولة الكويت ودولة قطر. والدكتورة دانا باحثة أولى في العلاقات الدولية والدراسات الاستراتيجية بالكويت.
She is a senior researcher in international relations and strategic studies in Kuwait and advisor for the Kuwaiti Journalists Syndicate. She holds a PhD in political science from Cairo University's Faculty of Economics and Political Science. She writes for Kuwait's Al-Rai newspaper and is a member of the Kuwait Human Rights Society. Her research interests focus on comparative strategic studies between Gulf states and East Asia. Indeed, soft power is one of the most important concepts of the international relations during the recent decades. The soft power is somewhat new. However, soft power has been and is still one of the most important components of power that has played a pivotal role in the international politics to meet the long-term and medium-term objectives without resorting to material power. The wall of Berlin has fallen due to the soft power rather than the hard power. Countries cannot be measured by the inhabitants or the size. However, they can be measured by the power of adaptability and building a holistic system of soft power. Indeed, the Brand Finance Index of Soft Power corroborates that Qatar has been ranked 21st in 2024 amongst 121 countries. That means Qatar has been ranked 21st in comparison to 121 countries. I'd like to thank you for participating in the 5th annual conference of the Strategic Studies Unit, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference. My paper will be talking about the soft power or the strategy of the soft power, a comparison between the state of Kuwait and the state of Qatar. At the outset, I'd like to give some examples before delving into the definition. Just simple examples to streamline the concept itself for the layperson. The Andomi that is available in all houses in the Gulf countries and in other countries. It is a power, a soft power of Indonesia. In addition to that, the Turkish soap operas that the Arab countries follow, as well as the foreign countries also, the Turkish cuisine, which represents a soft power of the state of Turkey, the Republic, in addition to the American series, the American soap operas that are being followed by everyone. It is indeed a soft power of the United States of America. So these are just some examples before getting into the definition. It's worth noting that Joseph Nye at Harvard University, he was the one who coined this phrase, and he said that soft power is to take what you need from the other party by way of conviction and by way of admiration, rather than by resorting to economic or hard power. So convincing the other party is very important. So soft power versus hard power, this is the equation. Soft power, in accordance with the international relations, is used by the Gulf states by and large and by other states. The soft power is a kind of a trade-off rather than using the military power or the hard power and incurring losses amongst humans and the infrastructure and so on and so forth, using kind of different tools in order to get to the same objective. As far as the Kuwaiti soft power, I'd like to say that there are 4 indexes of the Kuwaiti soft power. The democratic model of Kuwait is one of them. In Kuwait, we have a democratic model that relies on the Ummah Majlis that is representative of the populace, and this has made the Kuwait a democratic, optimal, ideal model that had constituted a great example to the other countries in the region as well as the international community. Kuwait has a good democratic model, and this had cemented its diplomacy across the world. As far as the financial assistance is concerned, Kuwait is at the forefront of the donor countries through the Kuwaiti Development Fund. The Kuwaiti Development Fund has played a major role. It provides loans to different countries to launch infrastructure related projects, medical related programs, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, the Kuwaiti Red Crescent has also provided assistance to the inflicted countries regionally and internationally, and this has constituted an economic tool that represents one feature of the soft power. Also, the mediation efforts. Kuwait has been and still playing a mediation effort in different countries, especially in our region. Kuwait, before the Yemeni conflict in 2008, Kuwait has hosted the UN peace talks on the Yemen. Also, the Gulf Rift in 2017 that was solved in 2020, Kuwait played a major role in mediating amongst the brothers in the Gulf. This mediation effort plays a major role as another soft power related tool. In addition to that, the Gulf Cup in 2017 has been hosted by Kuwait when Qatar has been subject to certain aggressive acts by different countries. So hosting such sport events in the Kuwait cements its position and consolidates its soft power regionally and internationally. This is as far as the Kuwaiti soft power is concerned in brief. As for Qatar, by and large, the GCC countries do exhibit a soft power, and because the region is intertwined, what takes place in Kuwait takes place in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, because this is a one block. So the soft power of the GCC countries is kind of intrinsic, with some mild differences. Qatar is famous of being a mediator. It has played a mediation effort regionally and internationally, and this has cemented its soft power starting from 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Qatar has played a mediatory role in the Lebanese crisis, in Eritrea as well, in Djibouti. Qatar has played a mediation effort in Sudan as well, when the RSF and the RAF were at loggerheads. In addition to that, Qatar has played the mediation efforts between the Taliban and the USA, and the withdrawal of the United States of America at a later stage. So Qatar has played mediation efforts in a number of issues, regional and international, and this has consolidated its role as a mediator and cemented its very influential soft power, as a matter of fact. In addition to that, Qatar plays a major role in providing assistance. The the Qatar Relief Agency, or Qatar Charity rather. Yes, Qatar Charity and the Qatari Red Crescent, they both played a major role in providing assistance, providing relief to the countries that have been affected by wars or conflicts or natural disasters and so on and so forth. And this has consolidated its soft power. The whole world indeed now is convinced of such mediation efforts on the part of Qatar. In addition to hosting sport-related efforts in 2022, Qatar has hosted, as you know, the FIFA World Cup, and this has immensely consolidated the soft power of Qatar. And as you know, the infrastructure in Qatar has been complete. The people were happy to come to Qatar and witness such sport celebration, a mega sport celebration. In addition to that, there is the media efforts. Al Jazeera is very well known internationally since the Arab Spring up until the Gulf Rift or the Gulf crisis, as well as focusing on the Palestinian cause and being credible in conveying the news. And this has consolidated the status of Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera has become an extremely important tool of the Qatari soft power. Foreign investments by Qatar is of great importance. The Chard in London is owned by Qatar, Harrods as well. In Europe, Qatar has invested greatly as well, and these kind of investments do represent different tools of soft power, especially when it comes to finance. All these indexes, all these components in Kuwait or Qatar, the ones that I have talked about, the mediation efforts, the sport-related events, the investments, and so on and so forth, do represent extremely important tools as the crises are afoot in our region, and the war in Russia and the Ukraine is still going on, and the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as well as what I call the Cold War between the United States of America and China in the South China Sea. In addition to the geopolitical related changes in our world, soft power has become extremely paramount in order to curb the economic losses and to propagate and disseminate peace across our world. This is what I wanted to say about the soft power, and thank you very much indeed.
We would like to thank the speaker for this deep discussion and presentation. And now we would like to move to Mr. Abdulrahman Saeed Al-Kuwari. So the topic that he would like to talk about is the gendarmerie as a strategic option, enhancing Qatar's defense capabilities amid manpower challenges. He is a PhD researcher in the critical scrutiny or security studies program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, where he earned a master's in critical security studies. His research focuses on security threats in the Middle East and the Islamic world, the development of strategic models to address defense-related risks, and the exploration of innovative strategies for counterterrorism, extremism, transnational crime, and money laundering. He would like to talk about the demographic component, so the total population and the need for security and the management of the different institutions of the states. So he talked about what hinders the development of a large, well-equipped conventional army. So this constraint underscores the urgent need for effective and sustainable defense solutions in order to keep on striking a balance between resources and also to work on security components. On the other hand, you have 15 minutes. At the outset, I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Omar Ashur and to the Arab Center. I would like to thank them for making this kind of event useful for defense studies. And I would like to talk about the problematic, which is the shortage of manpower or human resources, which constitutes a problem when it comes to the defense of small countries. These countries, they face intricate security issues such as threats such as traditional and non-traditional, such as hybrid operations that my colleagues talked about in previous sessions. One of the most important impediments that small countries face in order to have a consolidated power lies in the fact that they have a limited number of personnel, and this limits the preparedness from a military perspective. That is why I would like to talk about the gendarmerie as a strategic option that would enhance the capabilities of small states, including the state of Qatar. So this paper tries to delineate a roadmap as to how the gendarmerie can be used in defense strategies. So this plan would look into a number of cases where the gendarmerie played a very important role. This map can be implemented in the Qatari state or the Qatari case and other countries as well. Due to the time constraint, I would like to give you the conclusions that we were able to reach through this paper. And should you have any details, you can have them in the paper or during the Q&A session. We can say that the state of Qatar has adopted many strategies in order to reinforce its defense system, particularly in order to try to cater for the lack of human resources and try to plug this particular gap to also to reinforce the capabilities through training and qualification. So the training programs included the strategic, the tactical and operational phases, and also common operations between friendly forces and between Qatari forces in land, sea and air. And also it concentrates on the participation of the security apparatus and the civil organizations such as Hamad Corporation and so on and so forth. And this is indicative of a defense operation that is all-inclusive and also to coordinate with the civil component. When it comes to this conscription that is taken into account in order to have a binding conscription whereby all those personnel should try to carry out training based on ambush, reconnaissance, rules of engagement, and so on, for those people to be able to emulate real situations in reality. And these persons would also participate in joint trainings, which are some of the most important components of the armed forces in the state of Qatar. And also we have a strategy whereby you utilize technologies, and there are two sides that are taken into account. The first component is to increase the level of effectiveness through modernizing of the armament system and renewal of the arsenal, and also to increase the level of military effectiveness. The second component, which is the use of technology and the usage of technology in order to compensate for the limited personnel, whereby it is appropriate and possible to substitute the manpower with the technology. And the substitution is not a complete one, but a partial one. And this is an expansion of Dr. Anthony King's presentation that took place yesterday. So the strategy of reinforcing military alliances, and this is something that was mentioned by our colleagues, and here we have partnerships with the allies such as the US, Turkey, and NATO. Talking about the Qatari case and how it dealt with the shortage of manpower, and here I would like to shine light on the importance of including la gendarmerie as a strategic option to enhance Qatar's defense capabilities. So we're talking about police in military statute, and this is similar to regular armies and also having components of the police, and this would enable the gendarmerie to carry out security and military activities. We have this table that shows the different forces that la gendarmerie has, and we looked into the legal bases that have led to the establishment of them and the operations in which they have participated and the classification of the duties. Are these duties more leaning towards the policing activities or defense activities or military activities? And la gendarmerie carries out many duties throughout the history, and the conclusion of this table shows that 27% of the gendarmerie forces carry out military traditional activities similar to regular armies, and 33% of the gendarmerie carry out police activities, and 40% of those forces carry out gendarmerie duties such as combating terrorism and so on and so forth. The statistics have shown that 21% of these forces are independent and are not under the umbrella of the Ministry of Defense nor the Ministry of Interior. 42% of these forces follow the Ministry of Interior, and 32% follow the Ministry of Defense. And from the previous experiences and from the analysis that was carried out in analyzing these forces, we find that there are many manifestations of such forces and such support, and it differs from one case to another. And here we can talk about 4 ways or methods in order to combat irregular threats such as conflicts, problems between regular armed forces and organized non-state actors. And the joint Algerian forces that had 60,000 fighters from the Algerian military and la gendarmerie is an example in case. So that is what happened in Algeria. The same applies to la gendarmerie in Turkey and their operations against PKK and the participation in peace preservation and peace building. This would give us the opportunity to protect and keep those forces in a state of defense. So Italy has mobilized, out of the forces that were mobilized in the southern part of Iraq, 400 of them were from gendarmerie. And the Ukrainian, of course, example is also another example. Gendarmerie in Ukraine has been very decisive in Kiev against the Russian military advancement. So this shows the dual nature of la gendarmerie between the preservation of security and safety and defense. The special units have joined the armed forces in military operations, and they have been carrying out pure military operations. And we have the public order protection units. They have worked on combating terrorism, and these are special purpose units. And we have a fourth form, which is the protection of borders, land and sea and air borders. So the gendarmerie also protects the border between Turkey, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and the military protects the borders, the other regional borders. In conclusion, so the support of the armed forces by the gendarmerie comes in different forms and shapes, and it depends on the nature of the threat. And this leads us to the last point. How is this chosen? So I think that this topic is very important indeed. So theory has to be transformed into practice. So military concepts that are taught in the different military colleges is to transform these theories into concepts that can be implemented on the ground. And the component that I would like to talk about intersects with other kind of ideas, such as what Anthony King had talked about, and also what Hannah had talked about, and also it has to do with the problematics that Mr. Talib al-Flage also talked about, and also how Ukraine is preparing itself in the maritime space. So how can we get the right support? So in order to achieve effective integration, complementarity, and in order to achieve that, we have 5 main phases that start from the top to the bottom. We have to be able to assess the strategic situation through a comprehensive intelligence report or estimates. And this estimation that tries to assess any threats, potential threats, military and non-military, in the short, medium term, and long term. And the report would clarify if the forces are going to deal with the regular army or non-state actors or both. And here lies the importance of this phase in order to be specific about the identity of the enemy, points of strength and weakness, the goals of war. And this phase establishes for the coming phase, which is to develop the joint military doctrine. And here we have the optimum practice that should be undertaken against the threat. So we have indicated what threat exists, and now we need to show what we're going to do to confront these threats. And we're talking about times of peace and times of war, and also the doctrine whereby the defense strategy would be established that would have the forces, the police, the gendarmerie, and so on. And this phase would guarantee operational rapprochement and also the principles of war and also intelligence cooperation, coordination. And here we have to be sure that we know the role that is going to be allocated to the gendarmerie based on the nature of war. And this would pave the way for what comes after, which is to draft a military doctrine relevant to the gendarmerie, or we can call it a security or a dual kind of doctrine based on what was adopted in the previous phase about the role of gendarmerie in the defense plans. The third phase concentrates on the optimum way in order to carry out such a role. This level of doctrine will indicate the doctrine and the principles that the operational command faces in planning and implementation, and levels and borders of such responsibility, taking into account the internal components of the gendarmerie, the organizational structure of the gendarmerie. All of them should be aware of what is required based on the defense plan and based on the best practices, and this would lead to the formation of the structure of strength and power, and also the operational practices and how many operations can the gendarmerie respond to at any one time? And here we need to talk about military spending. How am I going to decide the size of the military? Is it 100,000, 92,000, 101,000? And this, of course, reflects what Hannah had been talking about when it comes to arming the maritime in Ukraine, and also the adequate armament. And the last phase comes, which is linked to all what was said previously, which is operational preparedness or readiness. And here we are talking about two dossiers that are the most important dossiers that can be discussed in order to achieve preparedness to respond to the different operations. And here we're talking about the SOP, which is the procedural special procedures and which in itself becomes a methodology for training. If the SOP is adopted in the rules of engagement, this can be transformed into a training methodology that would establish these forces in order to have a kind of a sophisticated response in different operations. The second part, which is no less important when it comes to fighting readiness, and here I'm talking about the material side, which is the armaments adequate to the potential enemy, and then to have the right number of personnel in cases of contingency or in peaceful activities. This is very briefly what I try to present to you here. So perhaps because I'm the last to speak here, perhaps people are tired. And now I would like to open the floor for questions and answers.
Would like Mr. Abdulrahman for his vision on the small-sized countries and the practical elements thereby. We'll open the floor to receive your questions. Please be succinct in your question because the time is tight. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your interventions. My question is addressed to Dr. Khalid Al-Khulaifi. I'll be talking in English. بالنسبة للإطار النظري قررتم أن تستخدموا نظرية تانيرية رغم أن هذه النظرية لا تحدد سياسات الدول الخارجية. ربما هنالك نهج كلاسيكي جديد يتحدث عن اللاسلطوية ويتحدث عن مركزية السلطة ويتحدث عن الأنانية، ولكن هنالك أيضا جوانب أخرى ترتبط بمعرفة قوة الدولة وكيف يمكن تحويلها إلى سياسات خارجية. كان يمكن اعتماد هذا النهج للحديث عن استراتيجيات الدول. I would like just to ask you about the soft power that hinges on the cultural diplomacy. In Kuwait, we have been acquainted with the Al-Arabi newspaper that has been famous and it has been read by the Arab elite. And the higher Kuwaiti Council of Culture played a major role in this regard, and indeed during the Iraqi-Kuwaiti crisis as well. My question is addressed to Dr. Abdulrahman. How do you define the gendarme, and what is the institution in Qatar that represents the gendarme? Is it Al-Khouya or Al-Faza or others? The gendarme as well has played a major role in changing the balance of power towards perhaps the army, or perhaps towards different institutions within the same country? A third question, Mr. Nabil. Thank you. My question is addressed to Dr. Khalid. The taxonomy of the states, in accordance with the approach that you have relied on, depended mainly on the size. I think we can go beyond the size in defining the power, whether it is small, medium, or large. I think relying on the size itself has become obsolete. Do you think that the methodology that you have relied upon might hinge on different elements rather than the size? And you've talked about different kind of types of power. You talked about the hard, soft, and smart powers, but you haven't mentioned the sharp power. And the sharp power has become very present, especially when China and Russia has resorted to such power in influencing the US elections. Last question is addressed to Mr. Abdulrahman. When it comes to the gendarme, have you thought about the smart force? We said that there is a problem in the manpower, the human power, that can be kind of supplanted by the technology. But the technology is nothing to do with tools per se, but perhaps the rehabilitation of the system so that it becomes smart rather than the tool itself. So can this be applied in the gendarme-related force? سأجيب عن السؤال الأول وبسرعة.
Which wasn't concentrated on foreign policy in order for me to shift to neoclassical realism. But I could go beyond, I could apply even classical realism into it. I could apply neoclassical realism, I could apply neoclassical realism, I could apply liberalism, neoliberalism, constructivism, Marxism. I could name all the theories that you could apply. It's just the scope of the research requires you to go into neorealism, because I believe that neorealism kind of undervalues small states, and therefore I felt it like it was a challenge in order for me to prove Mearsheimer and Steve Waltz, the names that terrifies everybody whenever we bring them up into the discussion, to challenge them and say, no, small states are not what weak and vulnerable entities, and bring that upon. السؤال الثاني، أنا بدأت، ما أدري إذا كنت موجود في بداية المحاضرة، واستدليت في البداية أن هناك أنواع كثيرة للقوة، وسمعنا بأنواع الرنتد والستل يعني قد تصنع مسمى للقوة سمها ما تشاء، إن كانت شارب، إن كانت اون ايدج، إن كانت مدورة، إن كانت يعني مسميات القوة قد تختلف. أنا السبب الرئيسي إيمانا مني كباحث أن ناي، أتوقع أن ناي استطاع بشكل ممنهج رسم أساسيات لمفاهيم القوة الناعمة والقوة الذكية، من ما أدى إلى أني أنا أتبع النهج اللي هو اتبعه في البحث وأحط السكوب هذا، لأن الأمانة لم يتم تسليط الضوء على الأساسيات الموجودة في العلم نفسه على أساس أن أنا أبدأ أكتشف أنواع أخرى.
You have different kind of names of power, and the subject matter is indeed large, and you can't just pinpoint one definition. So, and when it comes to the question of the size itself, I have concluded the following.
Is like arguing who came first, the chicken or the egg. You will never reach that conclusion. I could give you textbooks that will go beyond يعني مسألة إن تعريف الدولة الصغيرة، من فوكس، من روتستين، من كوهين. You could go on about يعني تعريف الدولة الصغيرة، لكن أنا نصيحتي لكل من يبحث في الدولة الصغيرة: focus on the scope of your research.
So to focus on the scope of your research, and then try to scope the definition based on the scope of your research, following the funnel approach rather than the tunnel approach. Dr. Danah, as far as the brother who had touched upon the cultural side, indeed I have missed it, but still the cultural dimension of Kuwait or Qatar or other countries do play a major role. We have the University of Kuwait, we have also the Supreme Council of Culture, and we have different private universities as well. They do all constitute different dimensions of our soft power. Also, we have the Qatar University, a different kind of culture-related infrastructure in Qatar, and people come here to Qatar to study in different disciplines, and I have just skipped the cultural dimension. Yes, Mr. Abdulrahman, as far as the gendarme is concerned, this what we call it in Arabic, ad-darak, ad-darak, and the French literature talks about the gendarme. In the Arab world, we don't use this word gendarme in its French origin, but we use the word darak. As far as the state of Qatar is concerned, what kind of power the gendarme has, I think I had provided you with a table. I have presented a table and I've outlined the gendarme in different countries, including the internal security forces in Qatar that represent the gendarme, the internal security forces. You have asked a very smart question, my brother, yes, and it was twofold. When it comes to the gendarme and the best practices, have I followed the smart methodology or the different methodology? This depends on the level of the threat. In 2014, the Ukrainian forces have been dismantled, the Ukrainian National Force. And I think we have here amongst us soldiers who have participated in that unit. However, this unit has been rehabilitated, re-established to mount different attacks in the Donbas region, because the Donbas region had sleeping cells supported by the Russian special forces. So dealing with such issue necessitated a unit above the police and below the army. So here I have a security-related chaos, and thus I needed to use such units rather than the police or the army. And the issue is more kind of convoluted. In the break, I can give you different examples as well if you wish. Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid, and I'd like to thank all the panelists. Indeed, the papers, the time is tight. Please get to the point. Yes, I have a question to Dr. Khalid and another question to, hopefully, you'll become Doctor, Mr. Abdulrahman. I'll switch to English now. And
sharp when you use the tools of the soft power for destabilization as an offensive operation. So to basically you're using media, education, information ops to destabilize. So this is sharp. What you're talking about the smart, so it's a bit different, but where would you put responsibility to protect operations, for example? So this is you have a clear hard power with a humanitarian aim. Or even irregular warfare sometimes, like the Gulfian and the NATO force in Libya, on one end smart, in a sense that they are supporting the revolutionary forces, but at the same time there's a clear humanitarian goal as well to protect the civilians. So where would you put that in your framework? And don't worry about the IR paradigms. They, whether from realism to constructivism to liberalism, they partly explained what's going on in the world in a very specific time frame, and frankly now they are irrelevant I mean, Michael Dutch wrote a whole book. The title of it is The Cult of Irrelevance, and it was basically saying that there are new forces now and new impacts now, like non-state forces, like small states, like others, that these theories even do not see. And why? Because they belong to a different era. So that's one. بالنسبة لعبد الرحمن سريعا للغاية.
And very quickly, when it comes to the gendarme-related system that you've tried to describe strategically, the question is, are we talking here about multi-dimensional force? Are we talking here about the 7 dimensions of the war that it can participate in? When it comes to the Ukrainian units, they have, as a matter of fact, changed the nature of their operations, and they have moved to Kursk. And some of them played a part in the sea operations. Dr. Hans has talked about the maritime operations, whereby the Ukrainian military intelligence played a role as well. And hence, the maritime Magora 5, the CBB drones were developed, and they played a role in the maritime domain rather than the land domain. Yes, another question?
I have a question for Mr. Khalid. So I cannot agree more with Mr. Ashur that these IR paradigms are not valid because of the rapid changes of what we have today. My question to you, sir, is do you think that small states can achieve any kind of successful deterrence? Deterrence, small states.
Thank you. سؤال ناخذ سؤال ثالث واخير.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Shukran.
My name is Ali Malif. I'm Deputy Director of Ukraine Institute, institution that leads culture and public diplomacy and the part of soft power for Ukraine. And that's why I'm pleased that we discuss this topic and importance of soft and smart power. And I wonder about how the Qatar today addressing the influence of disinformation, amplified, especially amplified by AI.
دكتور خالد تفضل.
I'll start off with Dr. Umar. If we go into the stage of R2P, if we read, for example, the 2008 Genocide Convention, of which the R2P was, I met Gareth Evans, actually, the owner of the concept of responsibility to protect Australia. And if you go to the revision of Article 138 and 139, it said if state fails to, just to explain everyone what R2P is, if a state fails to protect its population against genocide, ethnic cleansing, then it's the international community's responsibility to protect the population. Hence why it was used in the 1973-2011 Security Council resolution to be implemented in Libya. With that being said, it was just a background to what Dr. Umar was saying. I believe that similarly, smart power could be implemented in responsibility to protect. As a matter of fact, I was advocating for it in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because, and this is what I was saying as an example of how it started in Libya in 2011, is that when you're mixing power strategies implemented in a certain scenario or a certain case scenario that you're having on your file at your desk as a policy, it becomes, in my eye, a smart power strategy. When you're advocating your foreign policy hand in hand to argue at the United Nations why your military intervention was actually legally lawful, is by itself a smart power strategy, in my understanding of how it was conveyed. Because Joseph Nye himself said, when he's defining smart power, is that it's the capacity to integrate and deploy hard and soft power resources suited to a given situation, established effective strategic influence. So with that being said, I see that scope. I know both of you kind of want to shift from the IR theory not all of us can be like Dr. Umar Ashur and, have releases at the University of Edinburgh Press. So most of the publishers will require you to have fundamental theoretical framework. Whether we like it or not, as an IR scholars, we have to go back to the fundamentals of international relations, which are the theories that everyone has to establish a research on. Every time that you try to publish something, they'll tell you what's your theoretical framework that you have. If you go to conflict resolution journal and try to apply for publication, they'll tell you what's the theoretical addition that you're giving to the current discipline. So the biggest impact factors that you want, just like Dr. Umar Ashur has, will require you to have a theoretical framework. You cannot overlap the importance. What I recommend doing is that look at it not from the frame of it being a sacred book, but that it can be criticized and branched out. And that's what I did. I took neorealism, which I think a lot of people trying to get out of that loop of neorealism dominance. I get it. I try that as well by giving a new branch of viewing small state from a neorealist perspective, a world of anarchy. Yeah. I think I've answered all your questions, right? أنا قدمت الاثنين مع بعض بس عشان الوقت.
Abdulrahman, thank you for that. Thank you, Dr. Umar, for this question. In brief, I follow certain methodology. I don't say that you need to support the land troops per se, or look at the second or third or fourth or fifth dimensions of war. I say that every country has its own specificities. You need to know yourself and your enemy, and hence you need to put into place a strategic methodology in order to surmount such a problem. I'll give an example. If the enemy follows a traditional strategy supported by an unconventional strategy and tries, rather than starting with mounting artillery offensive, the army would destabilize the enemy's country and enter through it. So the gendarme will play a major role, because the gendarme will be addressing the non-state actors, and the main task will be mandated to the gendarme to do this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abdulrahman. This is the end of our session. I'd like to thank you all for your papers. And indeed, our world is witnessing huge changes, and the Arab countries ought to understand the threats and the risks. And the GCC countries do constitute an economic hub, and hence the people of these countries and the Middle East ought to unify their efforts to cement such stability. May God preserve our Gulf and our Islamic and Arab nations.